comment. I noticed in all of the papers there wasn't a historical perspective that I would have liked to have seen going back into the 1980s. I recognize this as pre-Google, but there was some interesting work going on in evacuation technologies. I was the project manager of it in 1983. Now, it didn't get into the quantitative aspects that you people have, but it certainly got into the logistical and comparative aspects of various kinds of techniques and so forth. So that was 1983. Just a general question. I recognize it's a detail, but it's an important one. I got the impression, and I may have missed this or misunderstood it, that some of you were using clear width between handrails as one of your measures, and some of you were using nominal width of the stairway. Is that correct? And if so, then it's one thing to just as a group of people, a group of researchers, you might want to spend some time discussing some common measures, which are fairly important. Thanks.
Any comments from the panel?
I think in the paper, if I'm not in the paper, I think, and I'll double check this, that we talked about clear width and also width between handrails, but I'll double check that. Look, and the one thing I'd ask you to provide a little bit more information on is the 1983 report that you wanted us to, I mean, you know, just if you could send the reference, or, but how it relates to what we're talking about today.
That's just respond to that.
Yeah, it dealt very extensively with the transfer techniques that had been employed with various people, and some of the, it was done in a rehab institute, by the way, so we're looking at biomechanics there. And so it was an early examination. I think it was the first examination of it for various devices and techniques. And this was all demonstrated, by the way, in a national satellite teleconference. I have all the videos, I have the reports, everything. It's only a half hour away from NIST if you care to. And only temporarily so, because I'm leaving there. It'll be much farther away in the future.
I think that it'd be useful if we had access to that sort of material, and certainly be interesting to reference, especially if we can get any quantification from that as well. Other questions, please?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, in our experiment it was handrail to handrail width for the stairs, and this is specified in the paper. We just wanted to focus on the results as opposed to the methodology. But yes.
Dimitri.
I have a question to Jan Sorensen. Recently we did similar experiments, so it was very interesting for me. And I have a very small comment and short question. The comment is you use familiar routes, right?
Yes.
And we found that blind person moving along unfamiliar routes, the travel speed will be decreased significantly. In fact, we found that if the familiar route is blocked, for example, by fire or according to experimental setting, blind people can't move along unfamiliar route without assistance. This was just a comment. And the question is, did your sample include totally blind people?
Yes.
How much? How many, sorry?
I can't remember the exact number, but there is a distinguish between this degree of visual impairment, and I could provide results for the categories as well.
Okay, another question. Up at the front here.
For the first study, did those subjects that were totally blind use any technical aids at all, canes?
Some of them were using sticks, and none of them were using...
no service animals?
Yes, there were some using guiding dogs, and that's what the reason for the density measurements as well, that we have this 1 person per square meter in the reference area. So some were using the guiding dog as an aid.
A quick question for Aoife. The person in the device or devices, was that kept consistent across the subjects, or at least similar body weight, things like that?
Yeah, we had 2 volunteers to act as PRM, so they were told to just remain inactive and just sit still. We had 1 male and 1 female, and one of them was 3 kilos lighter than the other. I can't remember which way around it was, and so we added a weight to them, so they were exactly the same weight.
Yes, the gentleman was 3 kilograms lighter than the lady, and so we added a weight.
What was the stairway width?
1.4. Again, it's in the paper, yeah, but 1.4
Okay.
handrail to handrail.
Thank you.
Question just here. Just here. Yeah.
Aoife, questions for you. You talked about the different widths that they're taking up, 1 lane or 2 lanes, and implying that there could be then some passing ability for the people on the stairs. Did you actually look up, were people willing to pass someone being assisted down, or were they just standing behind there, or did you not look at that?
Well, yes, we've looked at that, and that's some more analysis to be done. But we did find when people, when the entire stair was blocked, the times that we recorded the device stopping, then was the time that the group could pass. So if there was a blocking stair, they had to be allowed to pass or asked to pass. And for some of the devices, so for example, the rescue chute, which took up slightly more than 1 lane, so 1.5 perhaps. Again, our observation of lane was just a qualitative note. Then sort of braver occupants could run alongside the very narrow bit, and other people would hold back. We did find with the chairs, so the evacuation chair, and for the carry chair with the men, so they were only in a single file, we did find that occupants were willing and able to very quickly pass if there was 1 lane. But again, we will try and do some definitive work quantifying that and publish it at a later date.
There's also, we surveyed the participants, and so we've got information from them about their willingness to overtake. But it was clear that with the evacuation chair and with the carry chair, when it was only 1 lane, the participants had no qualms in overtaking. They just overtook. There's no problem. We have a question right at the front here.
My name is Anne Dedericks from Denmark. I have a question to you, Stephen, or some questions. I don't know if I missed that, but the population of the people doing the work, how is that? Did you mention what kind of people were carrying?
They were firefighters.
Yes.
They were professionally trained, professional firefighters.
Men or women?
Sorry, they were all men. It was on the slide, yeah.
Yeah. And
we weren't being exclusive. It's just there aren't very many females in Central Ohio that are firefighters.
No, but we know that there might be difference in how to carry, and there are female firefighters.
Could I just follow on that for the firefighters? Were they like the A-team, or were they like any firefighters could do it, or were they like the elite, the muscular, the strong, or was it just like any regular Joe that was a firefighter?
We took anybody we could get. But to be honest with you, actually, given that we're measuring EMG, we are concerned about subcutaneous tissue, and so we didn't want obese firefighters, but none of them. We didn't actually have to exclude any. Yeah. So these were all relatively fit people showing up.
Yeah, there was just a series of trials done in the UK with firefighters with BA and carrying things up and down stairs and corridors. And unfortunately, it was the A-team. They were like the Olympic athletes of the firefighting world that participated in doing this. And that's, I'm not quite sure how appropriate that is.
That would not typify the folks that we had.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So just continue that.
I mean, the test object was obviously a male represent. The person in the chair out of the weight, I guess.
Well, right, it was 73 kilograms.
So they're safe in that case. It would be good to see the women also described. I mean, women carrying down.
If we could get those participants. Yes.
And then I was wondering the stress of the different transportation possibilities on the participant or the test person. Did
right.
you?
Well, I mean,
because I was just imagining being carried down backward, upside down the stairs could be
correct.
A physical stress and a psychological stress.
Correct. That is certainly a limitation of the studies. We don't have any sort of data from the occupants of these devices. We kept asking Rescue Randy, and he never answered our questions. But seriously, that is a major concern. And I can say that we all tried these things. We all rode down in them. Yes, going down backwards would seem actually scary, but actually it was one of the better rides versus being tipped forward onto the stairs. It's like being on the top of a roller coaster looking down thinking, oh my gosh. But when you didn't see that, it was actually much calming, much more, a calmer feeling. And as long as the guy above was smiling, everything looks good.
Just add to that, in the study that we did, we had questionnaires for the PRM, so we have data from them. The only trial that I stopped because I was concerned about the potential injury to the participant was the drag sheet, continual bumping, and we had one incident where the person almost, their head was about to hit the stairs, so I managed to stop that just in time. And the other thing I'll say is that I'm a bit more than 70 kilograms, unfortunately, but I got into the evacuation chair, and a young lady your size took me down 11 floors, not a problem. Two questions here, one on the side.
Can I make a comment on this?
Yeah, sure.
I have spoken with individuals with disabilities and individuals in wheelchairs, and they said under no circumstances at all would I ever get in that chair. And I'm not saying that there was a certain purpose for your study. I would love to see work done on, I would have loved to have talked to the individuals that the firefighters took down. We just didn't have the appropriate IRB approval. We were not given the approval at the time to speak, but it needs to be done, because if we are doing all this data and collecting data and how wonderful stair chairs are, and if individuals don't want to use them or they don't feel comfortable, I've gone down in every evacuation we've done with evacuation chairs, I've been in the chair. And there have been times where I'm tipped back so far that I'm nervous, and there's nothing wrong with me. I could have gotten out at any time. And it's how the firefighters or other handlers actually use the chair. And again, I don't have a disability, so it's important to understand our user community.
Hi, Shane Hogan from the National Disability Authority in Ireland, and really just wanted to follow up on some of those the very recent points about the importance of tracking the view of the end user, the person with the disability who's actually sitting in the chair. Similar to Erica, the anecdotal feedback that we get will be quite negative and almost hostile. I will not get into that to that thing. And it's not just about when there's a fire or when there's an incident. It's about being told that twice a year for the fire drill you're going to have to get into this yoke. Your work colleagues, in an office situation, your work colleagues are going to be the one lifting you, pulling you, poking you, prodding you, the same person who you're going to be having a meeting with the next day. And also the roller coaster effect that Steve mentioned is that feeling of sitting on the top of the chair. So I think it would be really great to kind of build that in. I think Aoife's metric is fabulous, and great to see us moving in that direction, but it would be really great to build that into it. The independence and the dignity of the person who's going to be using it. Also the need for patient handling. I think in a healthcare situation you'll have somebody trained in patient handling, but in an office situation or in a supermarket or shopping centre you won't have somebody trained to do the lifting. And it would also be good to see the comparison between the manual evac chairs and powered evacuation chairs, many of which eliminate the need for transfer, so the wheelchair user can stay in their own wheelchair, which removes a lot of the patient handling and the independence and dignity issues. And just the last point, the importance of working out what happens when you get to the bottom, which is a big issue for wheelchair users. If somebody is in an evacuation chair sitting at the bottom of the building, what happens then, particularly if their chair isn't around or hasn't been brought down with them. So, thank you.
Could I comment on that?
Yeah.
That is an excellent point, because in the 2 evacuation drills that we've monitored, some of the chairs have been so heavy that the drill was that they cannot use the elevators at all. So they would take the person down in the evac chair, and then they would look and say, well, where can we put them now? Their chair's up on the 5th floor, we can't use the elevators. So in one of the drills, they actually modified it slightly during the drill, saying, well, we've got to bring these chairs down via the elevators, but that's the only thing we can use the elevators for. So excellent point, absolutely.
Any other comments about that? I mean, I'll just make a couple of comments, just following up on that as well. I think in the metric we've actually identified that there's a user component as well. So the actual person in the chair, their opinion of the device needs to be taken into account as well. The difficulty with the powered chairs is they're great if all you're going to evacuate is the disabled person, but they take up so much space on the stair and they're so slow. If they're going down in a real evacuation, then you're putting everyone else at risk. And what I think we've got to do is that everyone has a good chance of getting out of the building, not just the PRM and not just the able-bodied people, So you also have to take that into account. And I think the issue with the wheelchair of the person, assuming it's not a powered chair, if it's a manual chair, then there's no reason that that can't be taken down during the evacuation as well by other able-bodied people. Just close it up and carry it down, assuming it's not a powered chair. And also the issue of the trained user. I mean, that's one of the things we're examining next. We're looking at the degree of training from no training, here's a device, now you use it. And how does that perform to different levels of training. We've got one end of the extreme, we've got the highly trained people, so we know how good these devices can be in capable hands. But how much training do you need to actually operate these devices, and how does the performance change with training? That's the next thing we're looking at. So there's a question right here.
Yeah, this is Jerry Davis from Auburn, Alabama. In the part of the United States that I live from, we've talked about accessibility and then egress. I might suggest there's something such as Ingress. When we have tornado events, we do not try to take people out of the buildings. We try to move people inward, inside the buildings, into safe zones. And so we look, I've been working on a problem for a couple of years, where we look to these kind of devices, and stairs really are not the issue, speed is the issue, because it's what you have. Many, many times this is 10 to 25 minutes. And you might have 200 beds in a nursing home with all kinds of varying levels of locomotion or non-locomotion. And that limited staff has to move these people into structurally fortified areas. So it's just a different way of looking at this too.
Thank you for that.
Would that be what you're talking about? Progressive horizontal evacuation into the core rather than up and down stairs?
Yeah, or into the inner, exactly, or into a fortified inner room. I would also think that this might come into context at some level with some workplace violence issues, where if you had safe rooms and safe zones, that it would be more of an inward thing than let's get out.
Yeah.
So it's just maybe a different way to look at it.
But that's like horizontal, it's mainly horizontal movement.
Right, exactly.
More questions, please. So up the front here.
Glenn Hebben, Illinois, Chicago. Just to follow up on what to do at the floor of discharge. One good example was U.S. Department of Labor recently outfitted their building with stair descent devices. They bought 225 devices. They're outside every landing, on every floor, every stairway. But they also bought several manual wheelchairs and hung them on the wall at the floor of discharge, so there was a mobility device to transfer to when person got there.
That's good. Jay.
I'm just going to add a little more perspective. When I did my evacuation observations around 1970, we had a number of cases of people being carried in an ordinary office chair, a wood office chair, which I don't recommend, by the way. Having done some tests with it, it's precarious at best. But there were also carried wheelchairs. There were no devices at that time. They came later because the first international conference on this, and Eric Marcham, I'm not sure if he's here, he hosted the first international conference. That was 1975. Where we are today, Glenn is chairing a committee which is producing a standard, which we referenced in the 2015 edition of the NFPA Life Safety Code. That code for the last 2 or 3 editions has had 2 pages of appendix guidance information. The best we could put together some years ago. I chaired a task group on that. And so we're now moving from guidance information, which was somewhat ad hoc, to a first national standard, at least in North America, on this topic. So we've come a long way, and certainly that's exemplified by all the presentations today as well.
Eric?
Yes, I was there with Jake. But apart from that, I have 2 questions. First of all, I'm very pleased that Ed mentioned one thing that you mentioned latterly, and that was you're going to look at how much training is needed to actually use any of these devices, especially some of those available in the UK. Now, one of the problems, 2 of the speakers has said, we used great firefighters. Our firefighters are supposed not to evacuate people of any sort. So what Ed said about how much training is absolutely crucial to the development of that notion. Now, before you all take me up to task, I shall say, yes, they will rescue people who are under threat, but not evacuation of those people who are not under threat. I don't make the rules, fortunately. Thank you.
Another question back here. Is there a comment? Anyone want to make a comment on that? We'll take another question. Well, look, I'm eating into your lunchtime, but I think this is a fascinating discussion, so feel free to go if you'd like, but I want to hear some more questions.
Like Ed, unfortunately, I'm just a touch more than 75 kilos. Our experience of being moved horizontal in a standard chair. It wasn't a nice experience, and the paramedic was moving me in that, and it was frightening to say the least. So I think for actually some of the sort of trials, we should actually be looking at weights that are higher than 75 kilos, because you'll actually find, you know, certainly in my experience, a lot of disabled people are probably more likely to be in the sort of 90 to 105 kilo range rather than 75 kilo. So that's the area we should actually be aiming at. But more importantly, I think, is we should actually be aiming at designing buildings so that all can actually use them, both for access and egress, without assistance. That's where the aim should be. You know, we don't want to be people to be relying on devices. We don't want to see people being abandoned in refuge areas, or in the Scottish building regulation have now changed it nicely to temporary waiting spaces. Why the change, I don't know. But the whole idea of inviting people to come into a building and not giving them the right to be able to get out of the building themselves, I think is appalling, and it's not something we should be considering in this day and age. Certainly it's a vast improvement from it was in the early 80s when they brought out Part T of the Scottish building regulation and said, yes, let's have the buildings accessible by all. There wasn't a single mention about how you get them out again. We've moved on from that, but nothing like as far as we should do, particularly when, you know, the developed countries have all now signed up to the UN Charter on Human Rights. Start looking down the rights of the disabled person, and the vast majority of them apply to the built environment, and no country is paying any attention to that.
Well, I'm not sure no company's paying attention to that. I think there's a lot of moves around the world to try and address some of these issues, and in the UK, for example, we also have firefighting lifts, which can be used by people with disabilities, as well as firefighters going up into the building. So I think that's a bit harsh, and I think there's efforts around the world to try and address some of these issues.
I'm not saying that not efforts were made by some people, but those, there are other parts of the community involved in building environment are very much opposed to it.
Well, there are code changes underway that will allow elevator use for emergencies, evacuation. But depending on the building, depending on the incident going on, the stairways may still be needed, and so the devices would be worthwhile.
I think it's a difficult issue. You need to address. I'm talking about the dignity of the disabled person. I mean we have to respect that. But I think I'd rather be alive than be dead, or be left in a refuge. I don't think there's any dignity in being told all the other able-bodied people can get out, but you're going to stay here, and hopefully you'll be okay. I don't think there's much dignity in that. Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up on the other issue of mass. We did do some pilot work where we investigated up to 300 pounds. And yeah, it gets pretty physically demanding when you're manually carrying. One of the interesting observations was on the track chairs. We were still doing it with one person running the track chairs, as we did in the study that I reported. And they were still manageable. And interestingly enough, actually, one of them, the long track chair actually worked better because it had enough momentum to get it onto the landing.
Also the mass, in our experiments, the ethical review restricted us to 75 kilos. So even if we wanted, I said I'm above 75 kilos, but I volunteered that I didn't have a problem going down in one of the devices. I wouldn't have gone down in any of the others. But our ethical review restricted us to 75 kgs.
Well, in our case too, because they were doing so many conditions, 26 conditions or 19 conditions, depending which study, we were more concerned about fatigue and making sure that the EMG data wouldn't be contaminated by localized muscle fatigue.
Any more questions? Everyone to go to lunch? Can I thank the audience for a wonderful session and the students?